The bells of Baelor's September tolled iron and slow, one after another until the sound filled the city like an incoming tide. They came through shutters and arrow slits and under doorways, a dull brazen knell that made men stand still without knowing why. In the Tower of the Hand, the sound entered through the balcony doors and set the rushes to trembling. Eddard Stark stood with his hand on the carved stone railing and let the wind and salt and brass wash his face. Robert was dead. The chamber behind him smelled of parchment, candle stubs, and the bitter leech stench that clung to the dying king during his last hours. The maids had carried away the sheets. They had not yet taken the blood-stained bandages from the floor. Eddard stared out past the crenellations to the pale ribbon of the Blackwater, where towers pricked the morning haze and gulls wheeled and shrieked like hags. A red sail moved on the river, slow as a beetle. He could taste ash on his tongue. He carried too many ashes with him these days. A breath of silk and powder and the faintest hint of spiced wine preceded Lord Varys to the balcony. The eunuch made a soft, sympathetic sound and folded plump hands within his sleeves. "A sad morning," he murmured, as if it was news and not a fact that had been true since the boar's head was brought in from the Kingswood and Robert had gasped and raved and clutched at Eddard's shoulder like a man drowning. "Sad," Eddard said. His voice had grown as spare as the man himself. "But we are not children to hide from the day because it begins badly, as if the day cared what men did, as if the day noticed at all." Varys's eyes were two damp stones. "Oh, I fear the day notices everything in this city. It counts coins dropped in counting houses and spilled blood in alleys and how long one kneels before it rises. It is a watchful day, my lord. Already there is much stirring." He did not need the spider to tell him that. He heard the stir in the bells and the footsteps hammering up and down corridors and the guards' mutters as they turned points upon their spears and shifted to new posts. Robert, who had wanted only a war song and girls with hair like summer wheat, had left behind a tangle of silk and iron. Eddard turned his face away from the river. "I have written," he said. Varys's brows dared to climb. "To whom?" "Lord Stannis." "Ah." Varys slipped nearer the parapet and peered down into the courtyard. A pigeon beat its wings madly out by the rookery and vanished in a blur into the white day. "You have written." "I have sent proof," Eddard said. He had closed the iron-bound book himself and tied the cords, and sealed his letter with the direwolf's head in black wax. He had leaned over the table long into the night while the maester's lamp burned low and his hand cramped and ached. When the words were done he had sat with them, feeling their weight as if the letters were carved into iron bars he would have to raise over his head. "I will not make a bastard a king for the sake of peace. The law is clear." "The law is a queer old harper," Varys said very softly. "But never mind, never mind. Proof is such a weighty word." He cocked his head. "And while ravens wing toward Dragonstone, the queen, you think she will sit?" Eddard had not slept. He had stood over Robert's bed as the king drew his final breath and then stood again with a different paper in his hand, a letter naming him protector of the realm until Robert's heir could take up his crown. He had given the words to Pycelle to witness, his own seal beside the king's shaky scrawl. He had sat in vigil while the candles guttered and the room filled with the chill that always comes after a great fire has gone out. "No," Eddard said. "She will not sit." "She is not formed for sitting," Varys agreed. "She is formed for clawing." "Then best she finds her hands full of iron," Eddard said. He watched two of his Northmen cross the yard below, mail clinking, the gray of their cloaks darker than the city's pale dust. "Lord Varys, you will tell me which captains command the city watch this morning." "Janos Slynt commands the city watch," Varys said with a little smile, and watched Eddard as a cat watches a mouse that does not yet know it is in a game. "And beneath him, who would hold the mud gate, the river gate, the posts along the street of steel?" "Names." Varys named them, mild as milk. Eddard listened, memorizing. He had talked with Jory about such things before Jory was cut down in the street, and had thought at the time that the city was a foreign land, a place where stone grew in crooked ways and men's faces were as treacherous as the cobbles. Better he had thought of it earlier. Better he had thought of everything earlier. But a man's thoughts followed his years, and the North had taught him another pace. When Varys finished, Eddard said, "You will take a message to Commander Slint. The Hand requires the watch to attend him in the throne room, armed and ready, within the hour. All companies. He is to bring with him a purse and expects honest men to take honest coin to serve the realm." The eunuch's lips pursed. "Coin, my lord." Eddard had had to pry the coin from Littlefinger's fingers. He had done it the day before, while Robert still breathed, with Renly staring between them as if hunting for the jest. "You cannot mean to spend," Peter had said, smiling to make the word a joke. "We have nothing to spend. The crown is a toothless purse. We borrow and hope the debts die with us." Well. He had shown his dimples. Eddard had shown him men. "Honest men will be paid for honest service," Eddard said now. "And dishonest men will be paid to keep their hands at their sides. If Commander Slint will not take gold from the Hand and King, he will take iron. Tell him that too." Such plain speaking. It makes one nostalgic. Varys inclined his head. "And the Queen? She will not be hurt," Eddard said. "She will be confined with her children for their safety until Lord Stannis arrives." Varys made another soft sound. "I do not know that confined is a word one should whisper near a lioness's ear. She has left me little choice. You could always—" Varys fluttered his fingers, delicate as moths. "I could not," Eddard said. He could feel Catelyn's tight mouth in his own. He could see Sansa's eyes. "And if I could, I would not." "Your grace binds you in cords more unyielding than hemp," Varys said, amused and respectful both. "Yet grace is a charming virtue to see in the morning. I will carry your message." When he had gone, Eddard stood where he was for heartbeats enough to feel each bell knell pass into his bones. Then he turned to the room and to the work that had to be done. He sent for Tomard and Desmond and Fat Will and the other men he still had. He sent for Yoren of the Night's Watch, who haunted kitchen doors like a beggar and heard more than most. He sent for Barristan Selmy. The Lord Commander of the Kingsguard came in white and ancient steel, with the years set into the lines of his face and honor worn as easily as the cloak on his shoulders. He bowed. "My Lord Hand." Eddard held Robert's last letter in his cold hand. He offered it. "I would have you see this." Barristan read with careful stillness. When he looked up, his eyes were winter pale. "These are the king's words." He glanced at the empty bed, and its hollows. He did not name his heir. He named his protector until the rightful heir is established. Eddard felt strange saying heir and seeing in his mind two faces. The sullen pink-lipped boy who loved cruelty as some men love wine, and the grim cast of Lord Stannis, Robert's own brother. "Lord Stannis is the lawful heir. I will not stand a bastard upon the Iron Throne." Barristan's mouth went to an old soldier's line. "The Kingsguard are sworn to guard the king. And the realm," Eddard said. "And the laws." The words felt like an old coat. "I will ask of you this, Ser Barristan. I will ask that you do what your cloak demands. Defend the king's peace. I mean to confine the queen within Maegor's holdfast. I mean to hold the Red Keep and the city gates and the treasury until Stannis Baratheon arrives to claim his right. There will be those who say otherwise. There will be swords. But I would not see the children harmed, nor the women in their towers. Will you aid me in holding them fast and keeping them safe?" Barristan's eyes went to the window where the day had turned to a glare. "I served King Aerys," he said. "I have known moments when the sharpest service to a king was done by turning away from his orders. I will do as I am sworn, Lord Stark. If the queen resists, I will stay the hands that would overquickly spill blood around her, and I will not draw blade against the law. But know this, Ser Jaime Lannister has fled the city with Lannister men. He will rally at his father's word. The lion moves." "I know." Eddard had known since the day in the street when the lion had cut down Jory Castle as one might break a straw. "I will send word to those of mine who will answer, and to men who still honor the kingdom more than their purses." He sent Barristan away with orders, and Tomard with others, and Yoren with a whisper to be ready to spirit Arya away if walls failed and chaos came. When Sansa came, called by Desmond's knock and the tenor of the bells, she came with hair brushed and hands folded, eyes already rimmed red because the day had told her its nature. "Is it true?" she asked in a small voice. The child's voice Robert had laughed to hear in her, the one that made men smile when she said please and thank you. "It is true," Eddard said. He had never been good with children's tears. He had learned to rock them and to wipe their faces and to tell them the truth. He took Sansa's hands and felt their fine softness, as if the south had smoothed away even the north's chill. "Listen to me, sweetling. We will be leaving this city soon." Her eyes widened, bluer for the wet. "But Joff, Prince Joff, is not your future," Eddard said. "This too needed to be a blade of plain iron. He is not what he seemed. He is not." He drew in breath. "There are things you will hear whispered. They are true. You must trust me." She jerked her hands back as if burned. "You promised," she said, the words bursting like hailstones. "You promised me I would be queen. I wrote Mother. She shook with hard breath. "It is not fair. It is not fair." "No," Eddard said. "It is not." That was all. The world was a crooked table, and only the fool thinks he can hammer it straight and put plates upon it without wobble. He let his daughter cry her heat and grief and then told her to pack the things that mattered and be ready to go wherever he told her, without questions, without complaint. He told her Arya must hear the same, and Sansa made a face at her sister's name, and he loved them both and hated the city's brightness with a sudden old man's fury. By the time the bell's sixth peal was fading and the sun had climbed the southern wall, the Red Keep was a hive put to smoke. Janos Slynt came, armored and sour-faced, with 4 captains and a huddle of clerks behind them bringing records about the watch's numbers as if paper could be armor. Eddard received them in a dark, lofty hall that smelled of dust and old cedar and set the purse on the table where the light could catch it. The gold within clinked with a music men's ears remembered when their mother's milk had gone sour. "The king is dead," Eddard said. "He named me protector of the realm until his heir is established. You will bring your men to the great hall fully armed. You will hold the doors and the steps. None comes near the throne who will not be sworn to uphold the king's peace and protector's order. The queen and her children are to be escorted to Maegor's holdfast when I signal, and they're held with courtesy and strictness both. Lord Stannis Baratheon is summoned. You will accept pay from the realm." Janos Slynt looked at the purse and then at Eddard, and his nostrils flared, catching the scent of something that was not only coin. "And if the queen forbids it?" "The queen is not regent," Eddard said. "I am." Slynt's face was a miner's shovel. "Her father is Lord Tywin of Casterly Rock. He does not forgive lightly. My father is dead beneath Winterfell, where the snows are older than Casterly Rock," Eddard said. "I do not frighten easily either." He put a hand on the purse and slid it toward the commander. "The watch keeps peace. I am giving you the means to keep it. Take it, and you and your men will be named and remembered. Refuse it, and I will choose another." Slynt's hand moved, slow as a crab. When his fingers closed upon the heavy leather, he did not smile, but a gleam touched his eye. "We keep the peace," he said. "We'll be in the hall." He banged a fist against his breast and stomped out with his captains hard on his heels. Varys emerged from behind a column a breath later, scented and silent. "A bold play," he murmured. "Janos Slynt is a man who hears with both ears when gold speaks. But he is also a man with friends." "I know who his friends are," Eddard said. "I do not intend to leave their names unremembered." He looked to Tomard. "Take 8 men and find Peter Baelish. Invite him to the Tower of the Hand. If he tries to run, you may be less polite." Tomard grinned in a way that made him look like the boy he had been when he first learned a sword. "Varys," Eddard said, "send word to Ser Mandon Moore and Ser Ares Oakhart that I require their attendance for a matter of the Kingsguard. Send to Ser Boros and Ser Meryn as well. They may be less attentive," Varys said, "but I will sing in their ears." Before the sun had reached its noon height, the great hall was thronged. Candles smoked, though it was day, and tapestries hung heavy on the walls, dim with centuries' dust. The Iron Throne squatted hard in the light like a thing wrought of old sins and new teeth. Eddard wore plain gray with the hand's heavy brooch and felt the weight of his snow country on his back. Barristan Selmy stood at his side in white. The captains of the city watch lined the doors, helms low, cloaks the color of old straw. Janos Slint had placed men along the steps and with pikes across the floor. Eddard saw the man's calculation in each placement. He approved. Cersei came late, in mourning black that made her hair shimmer like coin. She had Joffrey by the hand and Tommen shadowed her like a faithful puppy. His cheeks pink and his eyes huge. Myrcella walked with head bowed and a gold fillet in her hair. Ser Meryn Trant and Ser Boros Blunt flanked them, faces sour and eyes narrow. The hound padded after with unshaven jaw and burnt face, fingers flexing half eagerly, half in boredom. Pycelle wheezed along in their train, and behind them Varys and Peter Baelish, the latter with Tomard's big hand just at his elbow and a holy glitter of innocence in his pale eyes. "Why do we gather?" Cersei asked when the room began to quiet. She did not look at Eddard. She looked at the throne as if it were a mirror. "The king is dead," Eddard said very flat, and the room made a sound. "Robert Baratheon has left to the realm his wishes." He lifted the parchment. The room held its breath. "By the grace of the gods and the will of a dying king, I am named protector of the realm until Robert's lawful heir can be established. I will keep the peace and secure this city." Cersei turned then, slow and with a smile like a thin cut. "You will secure nothing, Lord Stark. The king's heir is established. There he stands. Kneel and swear to him." 5 steps beneath the throne a gold cloak coughed. Men shifted. Eddard could feel Barristan's silence like steel beside him. He saw Varys blink and Peter's lips curve like a cat's when cream is near. "I do not kneel to bastards," Eddard said. The words were stones he could not drop before he had thrown them. "Joffrey Baratheon was not Robert's son. The king has named me to hold the realm until the rightful heir comes. That heir is Stannis Baratheon." Cersei laughed. It was a brittle sound and men flinched from it as they do from a blade dropped on a stone floor. "Say that again," she invited sweetly, and the hound's grin showed yellow. "Murder has happened here," Eddard said. "Murder will not be followed by usurpation. Commander Slint." The watch moved like a river when the dam breaks. Men stepped forward in practice pairs, pikes chopping down. In 3 heartbeats there were spears at Meryn Trant's knees and Boros Blunt's belly. The hound hunched and half-drew and let his sword fall back into place at Eddard's lifted hand. "No man draws in this hall," Eddard said, and the word "no" had an edge that told of Ranger's winters. Barristan stepped downward toward the queen. "Your Grace," he said with a gravity that could not be mocked. "For your safety and that of the princes and princess, you will be escorted to Maegor's Holdfast. The hand will keep you as honored guests until Lord Stannis arrives." Joffrey flung his hand, ruddy as a boy's, toward Eddard. "Seize him," he shrilled. "I'll have his head." "You will kindly be quiet," Barristan Selmy said without heat, and in his voice was a memory of kings. It was remarkable how the air changed then. Even Meryn Trant's lip twitched. Cersei went very still. "This is treason," she said softly. "My father will bleach the bones of the north upon his walls for this. Your father taught his banners to trample the riverlands when their lord's liege lay dying," Eddard said. "We all will answer for fathers, it seems. But not today. Today you will walk, your grace." Her eyes cut across the room to Peter, and the master of coin made a delicate little moo as if troubled by a sour grape, and lifted his hands a fraction as if to say, "What can be done?" Tomard's shadow seemed very large behind him. Eddard thought he saw in Peter's eyes for the blink of a bee a flicker of something not wholly plucked. Every man thinks himself the puppet master until the strings burn. Meryn Trant shifted his sword hand. Janos Slint's men pushed their pikes until the wood dug flesh. Barristan moved 1 foot closer, and in that small movement was the White Bull and Gerald Hightower and Arthur Dane, and all the stories boys told about what knighthood meant when it meant anything. Meryn Trant licked his lip and stood very still. Cersei did not flinch. Cersei never had. She gathered her skirts, lifted her head as if it were weightless, and took Joffrey by the wrist so tightly he winced. "Come," she said. "We shall see, Lord Stark. We shall see." The hound laughed in his throat, a harsh embarrassment, and went with them. Ser Boros rolled his eyes as if none of this mattered much and followed with pretended nonchalance. Meryn went sullen as a cod. Pycelle wheezed and peered as if all were splendid and orderly. When they had gone, Eddard let the room breathe. He looked to Barristan and nodded, and the old knight left with a file of Northmen and city watchmen to ring Maegrs with iron. Eddard turned to Janos Slynt. "Post double watches at all gates. No one leaves the city without writ from me. Close the mud gate at dusk. No man in Lannister colors approaches the keep." He looked at Peter. "You will open the royal accounts and provide coin for the watch, the keep, and the granaries." Peter smiled, a white crescent. "Of course, as the hand wishes. And you will remain in the Tower of the Hand under guard," Eddard said. The smile did not tremble. That was something. Peter had practiced his whole life not trembling. "Under guard," he echoed, and put his pale hands out toward Tomard as if offering to for binding. "You make a man blush, my lord. You make me wary," Eddard said, and that was all. That afternoon and into evening the Red Keep clattered like a forge. Chains were tested and doors barred, and men who had always thought of themselves as on the side of the winner forgot for now the shape of victory and did what they were told by men with steel. The queen and her children were quartered in Maegor's central tower, with 3 rings of men about them and Barristan at the inner ring, and no swords drawn and no insults thrown in the queen's hearing, and the girls allowed to take their little dogs in and out under watch. Arya had argued until her face went red about not being a little dog who must be led. She did not understand why someone could not simply thrust Joffrey out the gate and tell him to go play. Sansa understood too much, and her fury would take longer to cool. At moonrise, Varys glided into the Tower of the Hand again like a fish slipping into a familiar channel. "The watch holds, my lord," he said. "Maegor's holds. The kitchens complain. The day's length complains. The city complains. That is what cities do. But for now the doors are shut. I confess, I did not guess you would move so swiftly. I have moved too late all my life in this city," Eddard said tiredly. He had sent 2 ravens. He had sent one to Dragonstone with his seal and the king's own hand named. He had sent another, along a more dangerous channel that Varys had offered with a spread of fingers and a bland gaze, to Storm's End to call Lord Renly to the hall to speak to law and the memory of his brother's wishes. When he had written to Stannis, the words had felt like iron. When he had written to Renly, they had felt like a plea. He had never enjoyed pleading. Varys tilted his head. "I suppose we shall learn how swiftly Lord Stannis moves. Much will depend on whether he believes the proof or simply wishes to. Men usually prefer evidence that leads them to the places they have already decided to go. He has wanted his brother's crown in law since Robert took it," Eddard said. "It was never about want. It was about right." He looked at Varys. "And what do you want, my lord?" Varys smiled. "I want to live through the winter." That night the Red Keep slept the uneasy sleep of a household pinned to the floor by wind. Eddard took his rest on a couch with his boots on and the sword ice within arm's reach and woke 3 times to the wind making the shutters clack. He dreamt of Winterfell, of the Godswood's quiet. He woke with the city pressed against his skin like a fever. At dawn Davos Seaworth stood upon the sea-washed steps of Dragonstone's outer bailey, watching the gulls hover and cut at the air with their long wings. The raven had arrived in the night as the mist came in thick to lay its cold hands on the towers. Men had heard the bird before they saw its blackness against the black, and the word ran like a spark from rookery to hall. Stark. Stannis Baratheon read, standing at the table with his mouth hard. He did not invite Celis to hear. She came anyway in a night robe with her hair loose like spun ash, and stared with the eyes of someone who had been told long ago a prophecy that is finally arriving at her door. "Proof," Stannis said. He put the iron-bound book to his hand and thumped it once against the table. "The seed is strong," he said, as if testing the edge of the phrase and finding it adequate. "This is the work of a patient, honorable fool." Lord Ned Stark, Celis said in a voice that made the word sin. The man who stood by while my husband suffered the indignity of being passed over as master of laws for a popinjay. The eunuch's creature, the darling of old women with lapdogs. The man who did not support you when Robert grew fat and deaf. Stannis ignored her. He did that with the dedication of a monk. He looked to Davos. We sail. Davos had been a smuggler long enough that he knew there were always details that refused to respect men's decisions. Your Grace, he said, careful, because one must always be careful with Stannis's temper, which he held bottled like fire milk and put to precisely chosen uses. The fleet must be watered. The oarsmen counted. The galleys refitted with fresh rope where the rats have eaten. The wind will blow, Stannis said. Enough. I will not let my brother's corpse cool while a bastard sits his throne and the Lannisters drape the city in lion skins. He tapped the book again. Robert was a blind pig. Ned Stark has sent me eyes. I will use them. In the corner of the great room a woman stood very still. She wore red, as she always did, and her hair fell in a dark river down her back. She watched Stannis as a cat watches a lordly stag. The Lord of Light shows me a crown in your shadow, Melisandre of Ashai said. He shows me a sword that is like the sun. The false king is a nightbird with copper wings. Pluck them. Burn him. I do not require your fires to tell me that the law sets the crown upon my head, Stannis said, but he did not tell her to be silent. He had grown used to her in the way men grow used to storms and aches. Annoyed, accepting, turning toward whatever warmth is offered when the wind howls enough. Davos ran through the ledger in his head. The larger galleys could be put to sea within 2 days, the smaller ones today with a good press on the men. He thought of the Blackwater Bay with its slick currents. He thought of King's Landing, which he had seen once long before, bristled with soldiers, bright with banners that belonged to other men's prides. He thought of the Hand, who had smuggled him onions through siege and cold at Storm's End and had made him a knight. Stannis said to sail. Davos would sail. In King's Landing on the second day, Renly Baratheon was not present at the small council. He was missing from his apartments when Tomard went to bring him, and his green and gold cloaks were gone from the pegs. On his bed lay a single rose, pale as milk, and a bit of parchment upon which a line was written in a hand that had probably never known callous. We will meet again when you have learned your letters. Peter Baelish. Eddard tore the parchment into 4 long strips and let each fall. He told Tomard to guard against men in green. That afternoon he went to Maegor's and stood beyond the second ring of men, while Barristan escorted him into the Queen's presence. The rooms there had been arranged like a holy place. Cersei wore mourning again, and wore it well, which made Eddard hate the part of the world that was moved by such things. Joffrey stalked like a young hawk in a cage, pushing at small tables and swatting tapestries with a riding switch. Tommen sat softly on a cushion and watched Joffrey's hands as if they might speak. Myrcella had been crying and now pretended she had not. Lord Protector, Cersei said, how very gallant of you to come call upon your prisoners. They are my guests, Eddard said. They will be treated with respect. Your men have eyes, Cersei said. That is not respect. They will serve to keep your son from putting his switch to the wrong target, Eddard said. He looked at the boy, who lifted his chin, pale hair shining. Prince Joffrey, you will be respectful to the men who guard you and to your mother and sister. You will not command the Hound to do your cruelties. You will remember that your uncle comes to obey the law. Joffrey bared his teeth. Uncle Stannis is a traitor, he said with fierce pride, as if it were clever to be fearless before the hangman's rope. He hid while my father was king. That is untrue, Eddard said. He served as the king ordered him to. He fought in Robert's battles before you were born. He sat council and kept the fleet. He did not attend to pleasure overmuch. That last he kept in. He had said enough. He looked at Cersei. It does not have to end in blood. Cersei looked at him as a woman looks at a stone in her shoe. Of course it does. He turned and left. In the courtyard beyond Maegor's second gate, Arya came darting in front of him like a quick silver fish. Father, she hissed up at him. Ser Meryn Trant came to the dancing master's rooms. He had men with him. He wanted me, but he said he had orders to bring me to. She put on a deep voice and mimed a pompous authority with her mouth. To the queen. Syrio broke his sword in Meryn's, and then he picked up a stick and made it a sword, and he knocked the men about like they were bad puppets. He told me to run, and I ran. I ran through the kitchens and through the pomegranate court and up and down until I found Desmond, and he brought me here. A hard pressure gathered behind Eddard's eyes. Is the Braavosi hurt? He is made of wind and water, Arya said frankly. Meryn Trant is made of lard. Eddard let out a breath he had not known he held. He put his hand on Arya's head. You will stay in the Tower of the Hand. You will stay with your sister. You will practice your needlework with Septa Mordane. Arya made a face. Needlework. Your needle is for later, Eddard said, and managed to smile. He looked past her to the men. Double the guard around the girls, he told Desmond. If any man touches them without my writ, he will lose the hand that touched. In the evening he went to the Godswood. This Godswood was a southerner's play at a northern thing. A garden of imported trees whose leaves had the wrong shape and a pool in which a stone had been thrown to make ripples that seduced men into thinking there was wind. The heart tree was but a weirwood carved and dragged from somewhere else and set here as a pretense. More men had knelt here for show than for blood. Eddard knelt anyway because old habits make their own rights. He asked the old gods for the strength to be hard and just, and for the patience to be as slow as frost. He felt the city breathing around him, and the stone dead silence in the face carved into the weirwood did not answer, as it had never answered in King's Landing. Stannis' fleet came over the horizon as a scatter of hulls like seed thrown over a field, some large, some small, the water biting at their prows, their sails full-bellied as gulls mid-call. Word of sails spreads faster than plague even, and by noon the harbor was a forest of necks craned and pointing fingers while the harbor chains stirred and creaked and the harbor master's boys ran along the piers crying names as if ships were long-lost friends returned. Lord Stannis! Lord Stannis! It ran through the city. Stannis! Eddard stood upon the ramparts of the Red Keep with Ser Barristan, looking down over the river's metal skin, and felt relief as dangerous as a drop from a tower. He has come, he said. Men always come to a fight when their ghost of a chance looks flesh and blood, Barristan answered. We shall see who comes to a trial. Stannis Baratheon entered King's Landing under a banner in which a crowned stag appeared above a flaming heart, and the small folk threw barley flowers and chicken bones in equal measure. He came armored in austere steel, with his face as set as the slab of an altar. Davos walked a pace behind and to his left, and men whispered of onions and smuggling and knighthoods the way boys whisper about heroes around a winter fire. Melisandre came too, and each time she passed a man who believed in anything, he flinched. In the great hall Eddard stood beneath the throne and lifted Robert's letter, and Barristan Selmy of the White Cloak and Stannis Baratheon of the Salt Wind faced one another like two men who had been riding toward the same place for 20 years and now had arrived and found the other standing in the road, occupying the same piece of ground they had thought the world had promised them. Stannis went to his knee. The movement was stiff as a hinge that had not been oiled. He bowed his head over the parchment, and Eddard read the words. When he finished, the hall was so quiet even rats would have held their breath if rats could read. Stannis rose. I claim the Iron Throne by right of my blood and the laws that govern this realm, he said. I thank Lord Eddard Stark for upholding those laws. I command that the Queen Mother be brought to trial for her crimes. I command that the false issue she presented as my brother's children be found bastard and dealt with as the law dictates. He said it without emphasis, as one lists stones in a wall. Cersei walked into the hall between two white cloaks. She wore no color and no jewels. Her face was itself a work of jewelry, cold and set, with each feature honed. Joffrey was not with her. He had been a fury in the morning and then, faced with the barred doors and the fact that even the hound looked in his mother's eye before he looked in the boy's, he had fallen silent and begun to brood like a storm coming across open water. Tommen had cried. Myrcella had looked at her hands and braided and unbraided her fingers. The queen stopped before Stannis and the hand. She looked Stannis up and down in one cut of green eyes. "You," she said, as if the word were a stain. "Lady Cersei," Stannis replied. He addressed the hall. "Bring the boy." "No," Cersei said. "He is a child." "He is a bastard claimed true," Stannis said, "and a bastard raised to take the throne of my fathers." Eddard said, "The law will be done with mercy." He did not know what the law would be. He knew only what he hoped it could be bent to be while still being law. Then the great hall erupted into a sound like the sea breaking over sharp rocks. Men do not like to be near justice when it has teeth. Eddard felt the moment as if the room shifted underfoot, the way a ship dips when a swell runs under her. Tyrell men had not come. Renly's flight had drawn them south and away. Lannister men kept to their doorways. The watch held their pikes steady. The Kingsguard hissed like cats. Varys's face was round and smooth. Peter's was an unsheathed dagger held behind a gentleman's back. Joffrey was brought, with the hound walking a step behind him and looking at no one. The boy looked as if he had not slept. His hair stood like bright straw and his mouth pouted to hide how it trembled. He saw Stannis and pulled his chin up. He saw Eddard and dropped it. "This is the boy," Stannis said. "He is not the king." "No," Eddard agreed. He could not bear to look to Sansa, who stood at the back of the hall with Septa Mordain and hands clenched in the fine folds of her gown. He could not bear to be a father here. He had to be a hand. He had to be a man. "He will be dealt with. You will not hurt him," Sansa whispered, and he wished he had been deaf. He forced himself to keep his gaze hard. He forced himself to say what law required. "That depends upon the law," Stannis said, and in those words was all the iron the man carried inside his bones. Barristan stepped forward. "Your Grace," he said, "the law is a blade. One must choose how it is swung. There have been pardons for children in such matters." Stannis's mouth twitched. "Pardons do not change bastardy," he said, but the stiffness in him loosened a fraction. Davos, behind him, shifted his weight forward into a tiny bow and back again, as if he had planted a word at Stannis's heels. Cersei lifted her head. "If you want blood," she said very quiet, as if speaking to a lover, "I will give you mine." Stannis looked at her as he would look at a bent nail. "You will be tried. If you are found guilty, you will pay the price the law demands." "What law?" Peter Baelish murmured as if to himself and yet also to half the court. "A mother's oath? A faith's vow? Or the law you find congenial, Lord Stannis? I only ask to be clear which of the many laws is to be obeyed today." Stannis's face turned toward him with the inevitability of stone falling. "The law written, ratified, and sworn before gods and men. A king's wife who takes her brother to her bed commits high treason. The issue of that bed are bastards. These are not fancies, Baelish. They are the bones of the realm. Even bones may be carved," Peter said with a ghost smile. "I have seen the carvings in the houses of the dead. Lovely work, very precise. Perhaps we are sculptors today." "Take him," Eddard said, and Tomard and two Northmen took Peter Baelish by the arms. Peter gave his little silver laugh and went like a good guest to a bad meal. The trial of Cersei Lannister was set for 3 days hence to give the court time to pretend at order. In those days letters ran like frightened pigeons to Casterly Rock and the Riverlands and Highgarden and Dorne. The city breathed in expectation and exhaled rumor. Bald Septon Arnulf on the corner of Ragpicker's Wynd announced that the stranger himself would preside and that all men should be ready to die. A sellsword found with a Lannister lion on his belt was dragged into an alley and pounded with sticks until he ceased to answer. Bread prices doubled. The gold cloaks took to stamping the butt of their spears upon stones when men jostled them, and the sound made dogs whine. Robb Stark in the great hall of Winterfell stood with Catelyn at his shoulder and Reed Eddard's raven with eyes that felt too small in his face. "He holds the city," he said, half wonder, half something that sounded like hunger for more news. "He writes that we are to keep the peace, that we are not to call the banners unless we are called." "Good," Catelyn said, her mouth tight in the way it grew when she pressed feeling behind teeth. "The Riverlands burn. I will go to Riverrun." Your grandfather needs. She closed her eyes briefly. Your grandfather needs his daughter. Robb said, I will come with you. No, Catelyn said. She put a hand on his arm as if he were arrowwood and might bend if she were careful. You are the heir of Winterfell. The North will keep its head if you keep yours. Your father's letter is clear. He will not thank you for breaking it. Robb looked toward the heart tree in the mind's eye. He thought of Bran's fall, of the quiet boy they dressed each morning now with care and sadness. He thought of Rickon sleeping with the direwolves and waking with fear he had no words for. He thought of Theon, laughing too loudly, eager to show he was brave. He thought of the twins and the story men told of Lord Walder Frey's wives and of the bridge he sat upon like a miser sits upon a chest. He swallowed the desire to be where swords bit and men shouted his name and made himself nod. I will write to the lords, he said. We will stand ready. Catelyn kissed his brow as if she were giving him blessing and armor both. Stand ready, she said, and the words tasted like iron. In Casterly Rock, Tywin Lannister read 3 letters and fed 2 to the fire. He watched the parchment flare and curl black like dying leaves. He handed the 3rd to his brother. From Kevin, he said, although Kevin knew his own name. Kevin took the letter anyway and read again that Jaime had drawn men from the Westerlands and gone into the Riverlands to remind the Tullus what the lion's roar sounded like. He read that the Starks had not moved, that King's Landing was in the hands of winter wolves and a Baratheon with a face like a clenched fist. He read that Cersei was to be tried. Fools, Tywin said. It was not clear which he meant. He stood before a window that looked down upon stone and sea. His knuckles were smooth as polished stone on the sill. We move. Send to Crakehall. Send to the Leffords. Send to Lorch, who will burn what I point him at. The boy in Winterfell will either move or rot. The Tullus will scream. My grandchildren. He stopped. His face did not change. A man like Tywin knows every muscle between eye and mouth. He could feel the movement of Ie. Such as a huntsman feels a deer's heartbeat under palm pressed to flank. There will be payment, he said. In King's Landing, Sansa dreamed of a throne room flooded with milk instead of blood. In the dream, the queen walked upon the milk and came away with clean feet. Then she woke and watched Septa Mordane's mouth move and did not hear words. She prayed to the mother and the maiden both. It felt as if the gods were telling her she had prayed to the wrong ones all along. Arya did not pray. Arya practiced with needle with men who laughed and then stopped laughing when she did not laugh. She stalked corridors and learned which tiles creaked and which did not. She learned the eyes of the guards, which were tired and which angry. She watched Varys's little birds bring baskets and take them away. When she skulked to the kitchens, she sorted knives to their places, so if someone snatched one in a hurry, she would know where they had gone. When men tried to tell her she could not be in this passageway, she vanished down a hole only the cats used. On the morning of the trial, the September of Baelor was a white wound against a bright sky. Men lined the steps and the while of their breaths made a mist beneath the great doors. Eddard walked between ranks of men with pikes held with the tips not quite at the angle of a threat because he had insisted upon that small thing. Barristan walked with him. Stannis was already upon the sept steps with his jaw abar. The high septon waddled forward like a goose come into bread thrown by too many eager children. His crown sat crooked, as it always did because his head was shaped like a gourd and proud of it. Cersei was brought forth. She wore no veil. She threw no words like knives. She looked at the crowd and at the sky and then at Eddard and then at Stannis and then at the high septon and smiled very a little at the corner of her mouth. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had told herself a story and intended to make it true. The charges were read. The proof was displayed. The book, the lineages, the black hair and the golden hair. The children in the city and out of it whose faces were the king's face in poor clothes. Names were said and unremembered because the moment was larger than any one name. The September smelled of candle wax and dust and the power of men to gather in one place and pretend to be one thing. Cersei's answers were the answers of someone who has never believed any rule applied to her because she had reached out her hand and found it full of power from her earliest breath. She did not deny what could not be denied. She denied it mattered. She spoke of love. She spoke of dragons long dead and mad kings and the right of those who have been wronged by the world to make their own right. Stannis's jaw moved the way a saw moves through stubborn wood. In the end, the High Septon intoned a judgment that sounded like a man reading a recipe for a soup he did not especially want to eat. Guilty. Treason by the Queen. The city made a noise like an animal. Men who had feared hoped damaged hope, and men who had hoped feared theirs might be next. Stannis looked at Eddard, and Eddard met his gaze. She will be put to death, Stannis said. Eddard inhaled cold, and an old god from a cold land whispered to him, or perhaps it was the wind at the sept doors. Her children, he said. Stannis's eyes flicked, just once, toward the sept where Tommen wept and Myrcella sat very still with her hands in her lap and lips pressed together. Joffrey was not in the sept. He had screamed until the hound took him away. The hound had not come back. Eddard had men watching the hound. He had too many things to watch. The law does not demand blood of children for their parents' sin, Barristan said. He had taken off his helm. His hair was very white. He spoke to the space between Eddard and Stannis as if there were a third man there, perhaps called Wisdom. The faith will accept the princes as acolytes. The wall will accept them. Noble houses will take them as wards. Justice need not be cruelty. Stannis's mouth tightened. He did not like the wall. The wall was a place where things did not order themselves easily, and where men made their own justice with distance. But he was not an unthinking man. He was simply one whom thinking had turned to iron. The boy Joffrey, he said. Eddard saw Sansa's face. He had never thought to see his daughter beg for someone else's life who had meant her harm. But that is how the world worked. It took sharp-edged tools and used them to slice bread and then remembered only the bread or only the cut. He said quietly, "Send him to the wall. The Night's Watch takes boys and makes brothers. They will geld him of his pride." "Done," Stannis said, and the word fell like an axe into a block. "The girl may be sent to the faith. The younger boy, Lord Stark, you have sons. 2 at Winterfell," Eddard said. "Tommen is a gentle child." Stannis made the sound a man makes when he dislikes being forced into words that take different turns than his thought had planned. "Very well. He will be fostered at Winterfell under your hand with—" He looked to Davos oddly, as if the smuggler might have a way to measure wheat. "With due hostages to assure his good behavior. Myrcella will go to Dragonstone to learn what ladies learn. She will be ward and hostage both. The Queen—" He looked to the High Septon. "Tomorrow at dawn, justice." The city slept less soft than a hound's ear that night. Meanwhile, between walls, men moved in darkness as they always do when morning promises to be brutal. Pycelle took his old hands and old breath and pottered to where someone had told him to be, and there poured something dark into something pale and considered that if this were the last thing he did, his life had been a bowl of stew with not enough salt in it. One eats and sighs and goes to bed. He was discovered by a goldcloak whose wife had told him that very morning to keep an eye out for men who look like old babies. Pycelle wept, which is the kind of wisdom that saves old men sometimes, and sobbed that he had been ordered to a mercy. He was dragged before Eddard and Stannis while the city's lanterns still hissed, and stammered that he had been commanded to spare the Queen humiliation. Stannis looked at him as if he were a fly crawling across an edict. Eddard stared at his wrinkled face and thought of Maester Luwin's sure hands and soft voice and wished for the north with a sudden, sharp ache. At dawn, when the city glowed a pearl color through fog, Cersei Lannister walked upon the square before the September of Baelor with her head bare. She did not tremble. She looked at the crowd and at the men with pikes and at the sky, and then at Eddard. She did not look at Stannis. She said nothing. She did not beg. She did not curse. She stood with dignity, and that was the last victory she would have. Ser Ilan Payne lifted his sword. The morning took her breath and gave it to the wind. Men do not cheer at such things. Not most men. They go home and they pick their teeth and they tell their wives that justice is a bitter seed and planted in black dirt, and they think maybe the world is not so solid under their feet as they had told themselves. The city went about its day. Stannis sat the Iron Throne before noon. He did not look more comfortable upon it than any other man. It is not a comfortable chair. He named Eddard Stark his hand and Barristan Selmy Lord Commander of the Kingsguard still, and looked over the court with a gaze that made liars feel naked, though they had been naked all their lives. He sent ravens to Winterfell and the Eyrie and Sunspear and Oldtown and Highgarden, bearing the news and the demands of a king who had not chosen politics as his life's work but would suffer no man to do it worse than he could. Renly Baratheon crowned himself in the far south beneath a young summer sky not long after, with a cut golden crown of roses and stags and promises. Loras Tyrell knelt and rose and smiled in a way that made men forget better men had seen him smile that way too. The banners of the Reach unfurled like a field of blooms turned to iron. Marjorie Tyrell's hair was scented with the perfume girls wear when they intend to be remembered. Songwriters began to sharpen their tongues to write about secrets in a wood and a hand on a back and what made a king. Tywin Lannister's army rolled east like a storm over a brittle country, iron and leather and horseflesh, banners snapping. Jaime Lannister rode at its front with his golden hair and his easy seat and the arrogance of men who have done terrible things and been congratulated for it by those who wrote books. The Riverlands burned as if made of straw piled for purpose. Lord Edmure Tully bled in the water that bore his house's sigil. Catelyn arrived at Riverrun with the smell of smoke in her hair and damp at her hem and did what women do in war. She counted, she organized, she placed hands and words where they did most quiet good, and then she went to the wall at night and watched the river and prayed to gods who were busy because the whole world prayed to them at once. Robb Stark held the north quiet but lean. He rode out by day to speak with Karstarks and Umbers and Flints, and came back each night a little older. Theon Greyjoy swaggered and told jokes and shot arrows at nothing in particular too near the kennels. Maester Luwin kept letters and sat with Bran to watch ravens peck for bread on the lakeshore and told him stories about men who had been patient and what had won them, and men who had been rash and what had come. He did not tell him which kind of man his father was now. Bran watched the crows with eyes that were becoming wolf-colored and did not think of falling in his dreams anymore. He thought of running. Tyrion Lannister, just escaped from the Eyrie with Bronn's black grin at his side, fell in with his father at the Mummers' Ford and said things that made men grind their teeth. He watched the war like a dwarf watches a brawl in a tavern. Wary, with a proprietor's eye for who will spill which mug. The Lannisters could not take King's Landing with Stannis' fleet under the walls and the watch bribed and the hand's cold hand upon the city's throat. They could ravage the Riverlands and they did, and Stannis answered by commanding the Crownlands levies to push west and by naming men to harsh duties they did not want and by sparing no thought for who liked him and who did not. He made the small council a place where meals spoiled and wine soured, because his temper burned like a coal banked under ashes. He made Davos Seaworth a lord reluctantly, because he found he needed one honest voice and the other honest men were busy or dead. He listened to Melisandre in the evenings and scowled, and then listened again the next night because she leaned toward him with her voice low and her eyes on fire, and men fall into fires that warm them even when the burns are slow. Eddard Stark ran the city as if it were Winterfell expanded into quarrelsome stone. He counted sacks of oats and measured the coin for the watch. He moved against the whisper network Littlefinger had built street by street, buying in here, placing a loyal bastard there, making quiet arrangements with knock-kneed men who served big men. He freed Gendry the smith's apprentice from the wrong hands and had him set to work under Tobo Mott, with coin where coin had not yet been. He had Janos Slynt moved from the gatehouse to a post where the sun came in his eyes at dawn, and the men mocked him as Lord Keeper of Glare. And when Janos complained, he found himself instead named to the Night's Watch among other criminals in the black cells. Eddard did not sharpen an axe himself, but he chose the necks he put beneath it with care and sorrow, and when he copied out decrees his hand did not shake. He did not win love. He won the right of the streets to be quiet enough that men could eat their soup without looking over their shoulders too often. Sansa found her place flattened like silk under weight. She sang once and realized men's eyes at court slid across her, as if she were a table set too near a breeze. Her betrothal had been cancelled with a word. Stannis did not think of her at all. Eddard found a new match offered for her in a letter that smelled faintly of roses and of calculation. Mace Tyrell, thinking ahead to a world without Renly, offering a son proper and amiable. Eddard folded the letter and did not show it to Sansa. He thought of the north and quiet faces around his fire. He wrote back to Mace that the realm was a wheel that had not yet stopped turning and men should not try to climb onto it while it spun. He wrote to Catelyn and told her that their daughter needed the gods and her mother and a summer that would never come again. Arya did not become more a lady. That ship had never been built. She became a needle that might do more than mend cloth. She watched the Hound in a courtyard one morning, practicing cuts upon a post that had been painted to look like a man. He looked up at her as if she had poked him with a whisper. "What do you want, little wolf?" "To learn," she said. "Learn to run," he said. But he showed her once, and again, how to stand so that a larger man's reach would not swallow her. He did not know why he did it either. Joffrey went to the wall with a black-clad escort. He preened and smirked the whole ride north, and the escort made jokes under breath about how the ravens would learn new curses when the boy arrived. At Castle Black the Lord Commander bowed because he is a man who knows how to bend at wind's first blast and so does not break when the Real storm comes. Joffrey heard the wind whistle through the wall's ice and laughed, which made other men uncomfortable because the laughter made them feel cold differently. Jon Snow watched from the practice yard. He did not say the boy's name aloud. He did not imagine that boy's fingers around a sword hilt. When they were presented, he bowed and did not think of kings and did not think of bastardy and did the work before him because the snow still fell and the wood still moved and the dead still breathed without breath. In the south, Renly marched with flowers on spears and songs upon the air. He sent heralds to King's Landing offering to parley. Stannis refused twice with 2 lines. "I am king. The law does not bend." The third herald was Loras Tyrell himself, smiling like a knife with honey on it. He spoke to Stannis alone and came out without his smile. He spoke to Eddard next. "Do you remember the sound of banners?" he asked, imploring. "We could make a peace that would be remembered in ballads." "Ballads remember liars better than just men," Eddard said. "Renly is not the heir." "Renly is a king," Loras said. "Renly is a lord with men who call him king because it makes them feel the world will be gentle," Eddard said. "Go back to him, Ser Loras. Tell him Stannis will meet him outside Highgarden or outside Storm's End, or not at all." Melisandre told Stannis that in the flames she saw a stag made of shadow fall upon a man crowned in green and pierce his heart. Davos heard that, and some old layer of his smuggler's soul shifted uneasily. But when Stannis asked him, "Will you do what your king commands?" he answered the only way he had ever learned to answer that saved him and made him. "Aye, your grace." Nights later, in a green pavilion outside Bitterbridge, Renly Baratheon's heart stopped when it should have beat. His guards said that a cold wind moved through the tent though the night outside was still. Loras tore the pavilion down with his own hands and found only blood and a body that had been just there and now would never be anywhere. He wept as a man weeps when the world changes shape under his feet. He cursed Stannis Baratheon for a murderer and called upon gods he had never believed in and turned his face toward Highgarden. Mace Tyrell measured the hit like a man measures grain. He looked at the city where Stannis sat upon the throne and looked at the west where Tywin sharpened swords with gold, and he decided the Reach would not be the first to love a king whom nobody loved. He sent a letter to Old Town about marriages. He sent another to the Hand. Eddard read it and rubbed between his brows and did not answer for 2 days. He answered after that with patience, not because patience would change anything, but because men should always be forced to set down their desires on paper where they looked like what they were. In the Riverlands, Robb Stark crossed the Green Fork and took the Whispering Wood because a boy who had never bled cannot watch men burn granaries without moving when he has men behind him. He captured Jaime Lannister in the night with a rush of hoof and the grey ghosts of the north crying softer than wolves and harder than rain. He sent his father a raven with the news and felt the thrill of a sword biting when it bites true. He did not think of futures. He thought of the present tense, the blood on his hands which was warm and the breath in his chest which was quick. Jaime laughed when he was bound. He laughed because laughing was one thing he could always do and because he could not help but measure himself against whatever man bound him no matter what he was bound with. "The young wolf," he said. "How cunning. How very northern of you to use a wood to win a fight." Robb did not answer. He had not yet learned to bandy with men like Jaime. He would learn. He had time now, perhaps, to learn everything. Catelyn looked at Jaime Lannister through a slit in the wall and had to hold her hands still because they wanted to go to his throat and to his hair and to pull until either his head came off or she felt some relief. She had lost too much to the Lannisters to make good choices easily. She went to him after 3 days when she knew her voice would be the voice of a lady and not of a mother. She told him his sister was dead. He did not laugh then. Something changed in his mouth. He said nothing. Sometimes nothing is an insult. Sometimes it is a grace. She left him with the nothing and went to the parapet and looked down at the water and wished Ned were beside her to tell her whether she had done well. Back in King's Landing, Stannis ruled with a severity that felt like winter's edge in autumn. Men who stole bread lost fingers in places where they would have only been whipped the year before. Men who lied in council lost their livelihood when he could prove it. Men who flattered him lost their place in the room faster than men who insulted him, because he could see flattery coming and could not be bothered to remember the insult's words. He made laws that were not new but were suddenly enforced and discovered men loved laws best when they could be broken by themselves and not by others. He made new enemies in the slowness of afternoon hours. Eddard argued with him. He did it quietly and in rooms where few ears would turn. You cannot force a city into virtue by decree, he told him. You can only force it into fear. The one shrinks when you do not look. The other grows. I will look always, Stannis said. You cannot. Then I will hire men to look who are not fools and not cravens. There are few such men, Eddard said. Then I will make them, Stannis said. Eddard felt the ache in his bones that had started when winter began to nibble at the edges of the land and had never left. Then teach them too when to close their eyes. Stannis did not answer for a very long time. He looked at the room's shadows as if they displeased him by not being at attention. I do not close my eyes, he said. I see too much. Melisandre stood near the shuttered window, her hands folded, her mouth curved. The Lord's light allows a man to see what others cannot. The Lord's light, Stannis growled, but he did not dismiss her. At night the city lay like a lizard upon a hot rock, careful and alert. Varys moved along passages and spoke soft words and liked that he still had a place in a world of hard men. He did not know what he wanted entirely. He wanted children to eat and not be burnt in their beds, for Penny's men chose not to pay another man. He wanted certain prophecies to come true and certain men to be cut from the board because their existence made the board a worse game. He whispered to Illyrio Mopatis in a hidden chamber and agreed they would wait with patience. The dragon has 3 heads, he said once, and then laughed at himself because it is a game to say such things. He thought of Daenerys Targaryen far over the sea, and of fire and of the way the world loops upon itself like an old rope with 3 knots. He thought perhaps this time he had found a way to tie it differently. He thought perhaps not. He filed that thought alongside all the others in his neat, scented head. In Old Town, a raven came with word that dragons had hatched in the east. Men turned pages in high, cold rooms. They brought out maps and then put them away. They sharpened quills. The Citadel did not decide but was careful to be ready to say it had decided when someone else did. The High Septon muttered of abominations in the marketplace and then counted his finger bones as if someone might have taken one when he was not looking. In the Iron Islands, Balon Greyjoy stood on a headland like a man who thought he owned wind and water. The letter from King's Landing told him that men had stopped being fools just long enough to ensure he would get no immediate advantage. He took out his old anger and polished it anyway. He sent to his longships under the pretense of cleaning their bellies. He did not write to his son at Winterfell because he did not need to. He knew what Theon would do when he was told, and besides, not writing was its own kind of letter. The winter feasts in the north were leaner than habit. Men killed fewer animals and salted more than that. Jon Snow stood upon the wall in the south wind that licks a man's bones moist and watched the forest and thought he saw things moving in it that were not men. He had new brothers now. Joffrey had a mouth and a knife and a desire to be seen. He learned, slowly, where not to put his mouth and where to put his knife. He learned because the wall teaches all a lesson or kills them. The old bear watched and said nothing. Ghost stood with red eyes and breathed white in cold dark. Samwell Tarly wrote letters and tried not to hear Joffrey's voice when it rose like a boy's does when he is scolded. The wildlings went on with their plans and did not care who sat the Iron Throne. Autumn deepened. Stannis sent to Sunspear with promises of respect and of justice, and Doran Martell sent back a letter that weighed more for its politeness than its ink. He sent to the Vale, and Lisa Arryn wrote reply in a jerking little hand that spoke of fear and of wanting nobody. He sent to the Stormlands, and half came and half did not. He sent to the Reach, and the Tyrells sent back baskets of pears and replies full of poetry that meant nothing. He made a new office for counting grain. He dismissed Pycelle and replaced him with a maester who did not wheeze. He forgot to smile. He did not think of the people who might have loved him if he had let them. He did not notice their absence when they were gone. One evening Eddard sat with him and Davos and Melisandre and Barristan, and they ate fish with lemon and garlic and bread that arced steam when broken. The city hummed under them like a hive on a good day. They spoke of Jaime Lannister in a Riverrun cell and of Tywin's army and of Robb Stark's speed and nerve. They spoke of the Freys and the Twins and the North, which was white on maps but was full in truth of men with axes and women with quiet minds and children with red hands from the cold. They spoke of dragons and laughed, each in their own way. "It is not the dragons that will march upon us," Stannis said. "It is the old lion and his yellow cub. It is the boy in the north and his green pride. It is hunger. It is winter. I have seen worse things in worse fires than dragons," Melisandre said. "I will teach you to see worse things in courts than in fire," Stannis said to her dryly, and he did not entirely mean it as jest. Eddard said, "The Riverlands must be tended. The boy must be told to stay his hand when it should not move. And then, when it must move, he must be told to strike as his father would." "Will he listen?" Barristan asked. "He will listen if I speak to him as a father," Eddard said. "I do not know if he will if I speak as a hand." Davos tore bread and thought of the smell of onions in a starving castle. "He will listen if he does not think the words would shame him in his men's ears," he offered. "Pride sits on men's shoulders heavier than any cloak. The young wear it worst." Stannis looked at Davos for a long moment and then nodded, as if the words were a dish he had not wanted but would take anyway because there were worse things than peas before supper. The city went on. Men married. Women wept. The docks were noisy. The highborn fought on paper and in murmurs and sometimes in steel. The lowborn fought in alleys and with their teeth. Varys smiled. Peter Baelish did not laugh in his cell. He scratched carvings into the stone with a sliver of metal nobody had been clever enough to notice had been sewn into the hem of his very shirt. He whispered to himself the names of men who had debts to him. He practiced the smiles he would use when the door opened. He did not allow for the possibility it would not. On a cold morning with the wind from the sea carrying a sourness like spit, a raven came from Riverrun. Robb had written. He spoke of Jaime held fast and Tywin held too far west to do more than throw fire, and of a crossing at the Twins purchased with oaths and with the promise of a marriage. He wrote a line that had in it the boy he had been and the man he wanted to be. "Father, I am trying to be you." Eddard closed his eyes. He wrote back that the weight of a command is not the same as the weight of steel, and that the only way to bear either is to remember that men are not numbers and never were. He told Robb to hold to his word in Walder Frey's hall, because word is a rope that holds a bridge up. Without it men fall into rivers and drown, and the story ends differently than it might have. Winter's tongue came south over the weeks that followed. It licked at evenings and found mornings. Fires were banked higher in kitchens. Eddard Stark read numbers in the treasury and frowned because there were never enough. The Lannisters sent a messenger wearing yellow and black. He asked for his head back. The messenger said the king was a usurper and the hand a traitor. He said many things. He kept his head. He went back with words that were not kind and a letter that told Tywin Lannister, in sentences that had the exact length of a blow struck, what would happen if he built pyres in the Riverlands again. Sansa found that she could sleep some nights. She found she missed Jane Poole with an ache that the gods did not know what to do with. She asked her father to let her ride in the courtyard with the gentle mare whose eyes were soft and who never bit. He said yes. He watched her a long time with his knuckles against his lips. He thought of Catelyn each time Sansa smiled, which was not often, and each time she had a temper, which was not rare now. He had thought he knew his daughters better than the world would. The world had introduced them to him again. Arya found her way into the cellars beneath the Tower of the Hand through a crack that had been patched with mortar once and then never again, and from there into the tunnels where Varys's birds ran, and from there to a place where she could hear without being seen. She heard Varys and Illyrio again, and this time they spoke not in riddles so much as in names. She heard Daenerys. She heard Dothraki. She heard dragons, and pressed her hand hard to her mouth to stop a laugh, because it was the only thing that could stop a scream. She told her father. He listened and did not smile. He said, "There will always be more fires. We will put them out as we can." At the wall, Jon Snow rode with Qhorin Halfhand and learned silence in a new way. Joffrey swore and vomited and learned to stand watch with his eyes open. The wind taught him the truth about himself faster than men had. He did not become good. He became quieter. Sometimes that is a kind of good. Spring would not come early this year. That was a kindness. The realm could not have borne it. When word finally came from across the sea that a young queen had walked into a fire and walked out again with 3 things that moved and breathed and burned, men in King's Landing looked at one another with expressions their wives had never seen, because men do not like to be introduced to new gods when they already have old ones they fear. Stannis read the letter and sat long upon the Iron Throne without moving, like a carving, like a man sleeping with his eyes open. Eddard stood beside him and looked out over the hall where banners fluttered in their tame indoor wind. "We had peace once," Stannis said eventually. "Robert had peace," Eddard said. "We had quiet." Stannis's mouth bent. "It is not the same thing." "No," Eddard said. He could taste snow in the air, though they were in the south. "But maybe it will be enough for now." Stannis nodded once, barely, like a man acknowledging a priest. In the yard below, Sansa's mare tossed her mane and made a lovely arc. Arya sped past on foot, laughing, not chased for once by anyone who could catch her. Tommen sat on a bench beneath a bare tree and ate an apple slowly, watching the way the horizon does not change when you stare at it long enough. He would become a boy who loved kittens. That was a small thing. That was a kind thing. There should be more small, kind things. Eddard felt this truth settle in him like grit, like grain. The game had been changed, not ended. Tywin Lannister would come again, and the Tyrells would come at last like a tide. The North would hold as it could. The East would whisper of dragons. The Wall would stand. The city would eat and sleep and wake and gossip and make babies and bury the old and hold its nose at the smell of the tanneries. This is what cities do. This is what men do. Eddard Stark clenched his fist and let it go. He had made a choice to write a letter and to hold a hall and to set a woman's head upon the block. There would be curses for that choice and blessings too. He would count neither. He would count grain. He would count swords. He would count the breaths of those he loved each morning, as if his counting could keep them from running out. At dusk the bells of Baelor's September rang again, softer this time, as if remembering their earlier work. It had been a long day. Eddard stood on the balcony again and looked out over the Blackwater Bay where the water caught fire in streaks where the sun cut it. Far across, a shape moved, a galley or another thing. He could not tell. He rested his hands on stone carved to look like vines, and felt in the stone the work of hands long dead. He thought of the crypts beneath Winterfell and how the stone there felt different, and of how men took stone and made it mean things. He thought of his children. He thought of a young queen with fire at her back and a cold road ahead, and of a wall that would not care who wore crowns because it had never cared. He thought of law and mercy, and a world that did not reward either with certainty. He thought of the weight of a letter and of the right time to send it. "Winter is coming," he said, not as to frighten but as to remind, and the city breathed below him, and the sea did what seas do, and the bells tolled, and Eddard Stark stood where he was and did not wait for the day to be kind to him. He would prepare for it to be true. He would do the work a man must do under a sky that would devour all their names in time. He would hold. He would hold. And beyond the horizon a dragon lifted its head and tasted the wind. and far to the north a white shape moved as silent as falling ash, and in between, a city did not look up.